It felt like destiny. She was my perfect match, and I was hers. We shared the same passions for sports, entertainment, social issues, and even travel destinations. For years, our life together was blissful, but slowly, things began to shift. My wife, once so warm and open, started becoming distant, almost aloof. To give you some background, we've been together for 7 years, and for the first 5 of those, everything was perfect. I felt like the luckiest man alive. She made me feel like I was her entire world, just as she was mine. We had an incredible social life, often going out with friends. I would catch her looking at me with that special smile that always warmed my heart. She was my rock, my best friend, the one I knew I could always count on. We shared so many experiences: hiking, camping, visiting nature reserves, and cheering at football games. Our bond was something I never wanted to change. When I first laid eyes on her, I was captivated by her brunette curls, her radiant smile, and her kind nature. She always made me feel special. For over 5 years, we were living a dream. But then, things started to change, and it all seemed to begin when her new manager, Mike, arrived at her workplace. At first, my wife would come home and talk about Mike, how funny he was and how he had a way of making everyone feel good. I have to admit, I was a bit taken aback because, usually, she'd ask me about my day first. But now, Mike was the first topic of conversation. I brushed it off initially, thinking it was just excitement about someone new at her job. After all, she had been working with the same people for years, and a fresh face was bound to create a little buzz. Weeks went by, and I started noticing more changes. My wife became increasingly distant and secretive. She began working late more often, which I didn't mind at first, since she had always had an active social life. But then, something happened that really bothered me. We were supposed to visit a close friend, David, 34, who had just been diagnosed with a serious illness. My wife had always been incredibly empathetic and supportive, so I was sure she'd be there without hesitation. The evening of our visit came, but my wife was running late from another work outing. I called her several times, but there was no answer. I sent texts, but still nothing. After waiting a while, I decided to go to David's place alone. We talked about how he was coping, and it was heartbreaking. David is such a good guy, and it felt so cruel that he had to go through this. When I finally got home, I was furious. My wife still wasn't back, and she hadn't even tried to reach out. I was worried. Had something happened to her? I called one of her colleagues, Jenny, who I got along with quite well. I asked if my wife was still out with her. Jenny confirmed she was, but mentioned that she had left earlier, leaving my wife and Mike behind. I was livid. How could she skip visiting our sick friend for someone she had only known for a short time? I kept telling myself there had to be some explanation. When she finally came home, I was waiting in the living room. She looked at me with concern and asked, "Is everything okay?" I could only think of one word: David. She looked genuinely shocked. "I'm so sorry," she said. I lost track of time with work friends. She seemed sincere. She and David were close, so maybe she really had just forgotten. I decided to ask her who had stayed out with her that night. She mentioned the usual names, Jenny and Sophie. I pressed on. "Was Mike there?" "Oh, yes," she replied, almost as an afterthought. I asked if everyone had stayed out until the end, and she confirmed they had. The next day, I couldn't shake my anger. My wife had never lied to me before and had never let anyone down like this. I couldn't believe she would ditch our sick friend for a guy she barely knew. Over the next few days, she continued to grow more distant. She was coming home later, and our once close connection was fading. She was always on her phone, and when I asked who she was texting, she casually said, "Just a friend from work." I asked if it was Mike, and she snapped back, "No, but what if it is?" I had never seen her so defensive. I told her how it felt like she idolized Mike. I pointed out how her face lit up when she talked about him, so much so that she had forgotten about David. She looked taken aback but insisted, "I don't idolize Mike. He's just a friend, and I've already apologized to David." But that wasn't enough for me. That night, while she slept, I did something I'm not proud of. I checked her phone, and there it was, message after message, all of them explicit. I took photos of the conversations as proof, but it broke me inside. A week passed and nothing changed. The late nights, the coldness, it was all still there. I confided in a friend about my suspicions, and he suggested I try something new, like surprising her with a special dinner. I liked the idea, so I texted my wife and asked if she was free after work. She responded positively, so I spent the day preparing a nice meal, a bottle of wine and flowers. But when she got home, she looked at me with sadness in her eyes. She apologized, saying she had forgotten about a colleague's surprise birthday party and that it was the only night they could celebrate. I felt crushed. She left almost immediately, leaving me with nothing but anger and frustration. I knew then that I needed proof. I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. I decided to install a tracker in her car. I told her I was working late so she wouldn't suspect anything. When she got home, I watched from a distance as she arrived, then set off again shortly after. I followed her to a secluded parking lot where she met with Mike. She got into his car, and it was clear what was happening. I recorded the whole thing, knowing I needed this evidence. The next few days were surreal. She acted like everything was normal, smiling at me, holding my hand at breakfast, but I knew better. One day, while she was at work, I decided to search through her things. In the back of her drawer, I found an iPad I didn't recognize. It wasn't password protected, so I took a look. What I found devastated me: photos and videos of my wife with Mike, some with other people, and explicit acts. The worst part was seeing her with a man I knew to be a bigot, someone who held vile beliefs that she and I had always condemned. It didn't make sense. How could she do this? What did she see in him? Seeing her do things with him that she never did with me was a pain I can't describe. I watched all the videos. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. I copied everything, photos and videos, for evidence. I knew I had to end it, but I couldn't understand why she did it. Why did she reject me when it came to exploring fantasies, but was willing to do all of this with him? What made him so special? Why was she into a man she once claimed to despise? I talked to David about everything. He's a good man, a true friend. He was shocked, disgusted, even. He had noticed her change, too. I told him I wanted a divorce, and he agreed that I had more than enough reason. He advised me against confronting her or Mike, saying it would be pointless because she had already made up her mind. He told me I needed a fresh start, to find someone who was genuine, not a mirage of the woman I had married. David despises bigots as much as I do, and he shook his head in disbelief that my wife had done this. He's known her even longer than I have. Talking to David gave me a sense of control. For months, I felt like I was at her mercy, afraid to uncover the truth. I didn't confront her more sternly because I was scared of what I'd find, but after the photos, videos, and texts, I knew what I had to do. I went to a lawyer and started the process of filing for divorce. I had had enough. My wife continued acting as if nothing was wrong, still on her phone constantly, still going out late, presumably with him, but I didn't care anymore. I just had to wait 3 weeks for the papers to come through. When they did, I decided it was time to move out. Luckily, we were renting, and our lease was up in 3 months. I was prepared to pay until then, but I needed to get out. The day finally came. She went to work, and I told her I had to go in later to cover for someone. She shrugged and said, "Okay." No goodbye hug, no kiss, something that hadn't happened in months. Once she left, I packed up my essentials and left the divorce papers on the kitchen table, along with my wedding ring. That was it. I moved in with my old college friend Mark, who lives in another city. I was grateful for the distance, far away from her, the city, and our shared social circle. I wanted nothing to do with any of it. I told my parents what had happened. They were shocked but supportive. I didn't go into all the details. There was no need. All I could think about was that I was free. I assumed she would be relieved too, considering how things had been between us. I hoped we could get a quick divorce and move on with our lives. But later that night, my phone started blowing up with calls and texts. It was my wife. I was surprised. I honestly thought this was what she wanted. But I was wrong. I didn't answer her calls. I had no interest in hearing what she had to say. Her messages were all the same. "I'm sorry. I love you. Please can we talk?" This went on for hours. I eventually blocked her number and deleted all my social media accounts. I spoke to my lawyer about getting her to sign the divorce papers, but she hadn't signed yet. She did contact me through email, though. I kept that line open because I still wanted the divorce. She sent another email, apologizing repeatedly and saying we needed to talk. I replied, no, all I want is the divorce. She responded that she didn't want one, that I was the only man she loved, and that Mike meant nothing to her. It's funny because I never actually told her why I left, but she obviously knows. Her guilty conscience? Seeing her plead for forgiveness was strangely satisfying. I spoke to Mark about it, and he said I could stay with him as long as I needed. I was thankful for that, but he did point out that eventually I would have to face her. He said I left without getting answers, and no matter how hard I tried, I'd eventually need to confront those questions. Deep down, I disagreed with him. Why should I talk to her? Why? She didn't care about my feelings for months. She cared about her sick friend David, but she didn't care about me. So why should I give her the time of day? I know deep down I'm being stubborn. I'm also angry that she's trying to reconcile. I honestly thought she would have signed the papers and moved on with him. Now I'm even more confused because she's insisting on meeting. I talked to my therapist about it. She's been excellent through all of this. I told her about the affair, the photos, the videos, everything. I mentioned that my wife wanted to meet before signing the papers. My therapist was blunt. She said, when you left without telling her why, deep down you wanted her to plead, to worry. You kept telling yourself she wouldn't care, but deep down, you wanted her to care. You wanted her to feel the pain she caused you. But meeting her now might mean giving up some of your control. She was right. She added, if you decide to meet her, you must ask the difficult questions, even if you don't like the answers. You have questions, and you're not moving on. You're running away because you're scared that the last 7 years were a lie. Like I said, she's blunt. That was 2 days ago. My wife is still insisting on meeting before signing anything. I've talked to my parents and close friends about it. My dad said I could try to force her to sign, but that could take months. He suggested that if she's willing to sign after a talk, it might be worth it. Mark agreed, so I've decided to meet her. To say I'm nervous is an understatement. How should I approach this? What should I ask her? Should I be open or guarded? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Life got in the way for a while. After living with Mark for a bit, I realized I needed to return to where I used to live. Mark was great, but it was time to go back and face things head-on. My soon-to-be ex is still in our old house, so I rented a flat just outside of town. I told her I was coming back, and she seemed happy about it. However, I made it crystal clear that I would not be living with her. She tried to suggest that we could sleep in separate rooms, but I firmly refused. I also made it clear that I wouldn't be telling her where I was staying, despite her attempts to find out. Even with everything that had happened, we both still wanted to meet. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a beach where there were people around but not too many, in case things got heated, which I definitely didn't want. I chose to meet outside, just the two of us. I decided to record the conversation before the meeting. I emailed my soon-to-be ex with a set of ground rules. Answer every question I have honestly. No deflecting answers like, it just happened, or I'm not sure. I want detailed explanations. If you storm off without answering all my questions, it's over. No reconciliation. Answer, even if the truth hurts me. Don't be late. If you are, there's no chance of reconciliation. We met at the agreed-upon place and time. Afterward, I returned to my flat. The next day, I caught up with some friends. They treated me with a kind of sympathy, almost like I was David. Though I understand why, I got a lot of hugs and support, which I appreciated. But it was clear that word of our breakup had spread. I wondered how they knew, since I had only told a few people, but my ex must have told her family and friends, and from there, the news spread. However, they obviously didn't know the full details. They had no idea about the texts, pictures, and videos. Not even my ex knew I had them. She assumed I left because of the time she spent with Mike. She had no clue about the real reasons. I discussed the upcoming meeting with my therapist, who advised me to ask certain questions to gain a better understanding of what had happened. I'll explain more about that later, but the day of the meeting arrived, and although I had been nervous before, by the time it came, I was a wreck. Not because I wanted her back, but because seeing her would inevitably bring back memories of him, and I feared losing my focus and control. I arrived at the beach early, really early. The day was perfect. The sun was shining, and people were out for their morning walks. I had chosen a good spot. Then, out of nowhere, I saw her walking toward me, smiling. She looked great, definitely dressed up for the occasion, but she seemed a bit worn out and stressed. I felt no sympathy. When she reached me, she tried to hug me, but I held out my arm to stop her. She seemed to understand. We sat down, and she attempted some small talk, but I wasn't interested. I had my phone recording, and I started with the questions. When did you first kiss him? The first week on Friday. When did you first sleep with him? The same day on Friday. Where? At his place?
Yes.
Did you ever do it in our bed? She hesitated for a moment, looking at me like she wasn't sure how I would react. Does it matter? I stared at her, reminding her of the email she had agreed to. Answer everything honestly. She began to tear up as she admitted it had happened several times, including in our bed. Apparently, our neighbor had seen him, but assumed he was just a colleague. She kept apologizing, but I motioned for her to stop. I continued with my questions. Did you tell him about me? About us being married? Yes, but it all felt like a blur at the time. Then I asked the question my therapist had advised. When you first met Mike, how soon did he start asking about me? What do you mean? It's simple. When you two talked, what did he ask about me? Did he want to know how long we'd been married? Whether we were happy? After a pause, she answered, yes, he did ask about our marriage and if we were happy. Why didn't that strike you as odd? You met this guy, and he's immediately asking personal questions about your marriage. She looked at me with a confused expression. No, I didn't think it was strange. I thought he was just being generally curious. I pressed on with more questions, leading up to the most painful ones. I wanted to confront her about the videos and pictures, but I eased into it with a different approach. Did you hear about the incident last Thursday? I asked. The bigots who attacked a shopkeeper and trashed his store, spraying hateful graffiti everywhere. That's awful, she said. Yes, I can't stand racist people. Can you? I asked, my voice suddenly cold. She looked at me, confused. Then it hit her. She realized that I knew about the pictures and videos. She started crying again, this time for several minutes. I pressed further. Why would you even go near men like that? She was visibly shaken, struggling to compose herself. It's not what it looks like or what you think. What am I supposed to think? I asked. What was it about this man that made you disrespect everything we believed in, abandon your friends, and treat me like dirt? She trembled, her face red from crying. He was my new boss. He was charming and funny. He made everyone feel good about themselves. A lot of women liked him. Even when he first started, he had that aura. But when he started taking an interest in me, I felt special. Like he chose me. What does that even mean? I asked. She shifted in her seat. You asked for honesty, so here it is. When we started talking, he made it clear he was only interested in me. And this was after just a few days? I asked. Yes, she answered. He had a way of making me feel good, of making me feel seen. When he looked at me from across the office or gave me compliments, I felt like I was the only person who mattered. And you like that? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I know it sounds pathetic. I was weak.
But that's how it was.
And then? I asked. He became like a drug. I couldn't shake him off. I know it sounds pathetic, but he gave me a confidence boost that I hadn't felt before. He kept telling me I was the one, that I was special, and I believed him. What was it about you? I asked, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. He made me feel like I was the one for him. I know it's not what you want to hear, but I'm being honest. Go on, I urged, my voice thick with anger and disbelief. I can't deny I was attracted to him. It was obvious, she continued. Did you think you were hiding it at the time? I asked. Yes, I thought I could keep it under wraps. But the more he complimented me, the more I liked it. The more I saw him, the more I wanted to be around him. I wanted to feel special, like a queen. I know you treated me well, and that I was lucky, but Mike was on another level. I got a thrill from knowing other women were jealous of me. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. I asked for honesty, I said. I thought I was so lucky to have him, but as time went on, he changed.
And so did I.
I looked at her, not sure if I could stomach what I was hearing. I asked you what you meant by that. He was very specific in what he wanted. He got to know me and then pushed me to do things I didn't like. Those videos and pictures, they were his idea. I felt my chest tighten as the weight of her words hit me. I knew about his friend's beliefs, but I didn't want to challenge him. I didn't want to upset him because he'd say things like, "If you can't make me happy, someone else will." She wiped her face with her hands. He had this attitude that I should be grateful for his attention. I panicked and went to extreme lengths to keep him happy. I wanted to make him happy.
Nothing else mattered.
And what about our fantasies? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. I know, she said quietly. I know, but as I said, he was a drug I couldn't quit. The more I saw him, the more I believed him when he said you were holding me back. He made me believe you didn't respect me. I know it's not true, but I was hooked on his lies. And that excuse is how you treated me? I asked, my voice breaking. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I was awful to you, and I'll never forgive myself. But at the time, I couldn't stop. He kept telling me I deserved more, that I should be treated like a queen. So the more he spoiled me, fancy dinners, VIP shows, expensive jewelry, the more I resented you. He made sure to mention you and your so-called failures every time. And that's why I was cold toward you. I thought you were failing me, and he wasn't. I felt a lump form in my throat, my anger and sadness threatening to overwhelm me. She continued, her voice barely audible. It wasn't until I saw the divorce papers and the ring that something snapped in me. I know you don't believe me, but I ended things with Mike as soon as I saw those papers. I know I don't deserve any credit, but I'm truly ashamed of what happened. I can't imagine how much I hurt you. I know I neglected you and made you feel worthless, but I didn't see it until it was too late. I'm ashamed that I chose such a vile man over you. I looked at her, and her answers were unexpected. But she seemed sincere, genuinely sincere. I stared at her for a long moment before finally replying. Apart from the affair, I said, my voice low and steady, do you know what the real problem is? She looked at me, unsure. You wanted the affair from the start, I said, because you felt chosen. You said he was a drug. It's strange how much of life revolves around moments we never saw coming. You think you know someone, and then one day, you don't. You start to question everything. The foundation you thought was solid shatters in a split second, and all that remains are pieces you're left to pick up. We'd spent years building something, or so I thought. Years of laughter, shared plans, and the belief that we were invincible. But when the betrayal came, it came like a storm. Sudden, violent, and unrelenting. The affair, her affair, was just the beginning. The hurtful words, the cold treatment, the way she looked at me as if I wasn't worth a second glance, that was the real damage. She didn't understand how she made me feel. Or maybe she did, but couldn't grasp the full weight of it. For 11 months, I was the invisible man in my own marriage. I watched her transform, saw the woman I loved slowly slip away as she became someone I didn't recognize. I watched her put on new clothes, go out every night, come home later and later, looking like a person who didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't recognize her. And worse, I didn't recognize myself. I was overeating, withdrawing from friends, sinking into a deep depression. I was becoming a shadow, a ghost of the man I used to be. But she was glowing. She was living. I was suffocating. And then, when she finally looked at me, it wasn't with love or even indifference. It was disgust. You think you can stand beside someone, share your dreams and fears with them, and then one day, they look at you like you're beneath them. It broke me. I told her once, in a shaky voice, no spouse can say I love you when you make them feel inadequate. She claimed she didn't do that. You did, I said. For 11 months, you made me feel worthless, and I wasn't wrong. The abuse wasn't physical, but it was real. It was mental. And worse, it was deliberate. She would come home, all fresh from her nights out, her excitement still lingering, and then look at me, like I was the last person she wanted to be around. She wouldn't let me touch her, wouldn't talk to me. I was nothing, just a nuisance to her, the man who'd once been her partner. Yes, mental abuse, I added, my voice shaking. Maybe you didn't realize it, but you did it. She cried again. For hours, she cried. And I didn't care anymore. Maybe I should have cared, but I didn't. I couldn't feel sorry for her anymore, not when I was the one who had been left behind, ignored, trampled. She apologized over and over, but I didn't know if any of it was real. She was in denial about the damage she'd done to me, claiming it was all Mike's fault. Mike was the reason. Mike was the one who influenced her, twisted her thoughts, turned her into someone who didn't even recognize herself. But I didn't believe her. Maybe he played a role, maybe he didn't. But at the end of the day, she made the choices. She could have walked away from him at any point. She didn't. I had one last question for her. Do you love him? She hesitated, eyes red from crying. No, she finally answered. I don't. I know you won't believe me, but I actually hate him, as much as I hate myself, and in that moment, I knew it was over. She was done, and so was I. After hours of talking, she left. She said she told me the truth, that I was the love of her life, and I almost laughed. What a joke. If I was the love of her life, then why was I the one abandoned on the sidelines while she played out her twisted fantasy with Mike? But I stayed. I needed to process. I needed to understand how one man, Mike, could come in, with all his charm and manipulation, and destroy everything we built. My therapist had told me that sociopaths have this ability to control the narrative. They thrive on making people suffer. Mike was good at it. Very good. He had his agenda from the start. He didn't care about her. He cared about breaking us apart. He wanted to win. And the sad part is, he almost did. Mike wasn't just a man. He was the whole package. He had money, confidence, looks. He knew how to charm people and use them as pawns. He was in his 30s, the perfect age to be irresistible to someone like my wife, who was looking for affirmation. He'd seen her insecurities and knew how to exploit them. He wasn't interested in a woman who was single. That would have been too easy. But a married woman? That was the challenge. But there was something I had to give her credit for. She ended it with him. After everything he did, after all the manipulation and control, she walked away. And maybe that was the one victory I could hold on to. She chose me over him, even if it was only after the damage had been done. I contacted HR. Word had already gotten around. I wasn't the first person to report Mike's behavior. And once I spoke up, he was gone. He left the company, and as far as I know, he left town. I don't care where he went. He lost. I won. And my wife? She left the company too. She couldn't stay, not after everything that happened. And now, she's living with her parents, trying to rebuild her life. The divorce is almost final. A few weeks left. It's strange, but it's a relief. I had to know why she did it. I had to get the answers, even if they didn't bring me any peace. Do I feel better? A little. I understand why it happened. I understand that she was manipulated. But that doesn't change anything. I still can't trust her again. I can't shake the thought of Mike in my head, of her choosing him, of him turning her into someone else. It's too much. No matter how much she says she hates him now, it doesn't matter. He was there. He got into her head, and I can't forget that. But even so, I can't ignore the other part of me, the part that feels bad for her, the part that wonders if maybe, just maybe, she was a victim in all of this too. But that doesn't change what she did to me, and I'll never be able to look at her the same way again. The affair has scarred me deeply. I'll never marry again, not like I did before. But I'm trying. I'm working on myself, going to the gym, hiking with friends, staying active, moving on, slowly. And while I hate my soon-to-be ex for falling for him, for letting him choose her, I'm trying to let go of the rage. The damage is done, but that doesn't mean it doesn't still hurt. And maybe, just maybe, that's something I'll never fully recover from. But I won't be a victim. I refuse to let Mike or anyone else have that power over me. I'll heal in time. My therapist says it will take time, and that's okay. And so I keep moving forward, one step at a time.